Right, so here I am, or we are rather, in fact, here I am, Dave the Rave Roving the Rock, of course, remember who I am. I'm Bob Haddow, and he has come up for a cup of cappuccino and a jammy dodger, which is somehow seems appropriate for either of us, to be honest.
Well, both dodgers.
Yes, jammy dodgers.
We're dodging Calmac at the moment.
And we were away the night before last, Bob, we were not, at the pier at 11 at night, watching quite a big deal, which was MV Alfred coming all the way down to Arran to try and berth, first of all, at the east berth with the concrete ramp.
Where the cruise ships are supposed to go.
And the Waverley goes as well.
And the Waverley. And the woods, the ships carrying the wood now.
That's right, the timber barges, that's right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We went there at 11 at night and it was kind of rainy and things, but the vessel managed to get in alright, didn't it?
Quickly, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Reversed in, got tied up very quickly.
Yeah.
Clearly knew what it was going to do.
Yeah, and it was nice to see, wasn't it? It looked great with the big open deck.
Yes, it's a very different shape, very different boat to the ones that we've seen before.
And that's why it's a big deal, isn't it?
Absolutely. The questions now are how big, how long, how much, and how long will it stay? 9 months is what we hope for.
Yeah.
What will happen then? Anybody's guess. But by that time we'll know whether a catamaran is right for the Arran service.
And also some other services
and
possibly
other services,
on
yes.
the Western Isles, because as we've said, they don't have any on the Western Isles apart from one very small one that you mentioned before.
Yeah, and that's actually up the Clyde.
Up the Clyde.
It's a passenger vessel.
Yeah. So the Western Isles, the Outer Isles don't have anything like that. They've always stuck with the monohulls because they're seen as being better at handling rougher weather, aren't they?
Yes. The accusation is that catamarans have problems with big waves head on.
Yeah.
And they tend to be wet. The waves come over the deck and wash the boat down in salt water.
I have spoken to a couple of people who've travelled in catamarans in rough weather, and they did say it was quite rough.
Yes.
She
has been rough some of the times on the Pentland Firth.
Yeah.
But the Pentland Firth has a reputation for being a very stormy.
Certainly.
Part of the European network. Mm-hmm.
And it's managed up there.
So far, they seem to be satisfied that it did it gave a better performance than a monohull.
I heard that. It's actually been more reliable, isn't it?
Yes,
than the competition.
You do need to be careful because the competition route is different to the route, and the route from Scrabster is out into the Atlantic, whereas there is really no shelter. But on the other hand, if you're a tourist, going past the Old Man of Hoy is worth a bit of seasickness.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So then the vessel stayed overnight at Brodick, and Eukim didn't get much sleep. He's at work in the morning early, and then we went back down to the pier again about just before 12 o'clock the following day, which was yesterday.
Yes.
Because MV Alfred was due to leave the east berth and go into the main berth and try to do a trial run to see how it would manage getting into the same berth as MV Caledonian Isles.
Correct. We were waiting for the Caledonian Isles to clear the berth as well.
Because it was running late.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
So how do you think that went, Bob, first of all?
Well, I think the way that the Catamaran comes in, it's quick. It can lie alongside. It's low, so it doesn't catch a lot of wind. And then the question is, does it couple to the berth's link spans? And I think, from what I hear now, it does, subject to certain minor alterations, which I think would need to be approved by the Ministry before they're put into service. That's the choice of the owner, though. You can actually defy gravity, if that's a word to use, and sail her in as she is, with the problem that people will complain about driving their car on. She's got limited access on the port side link span for her, which in Orkney is quite acceptable, but on the Clyde it's a different thing. We're now waiting to hear if the same problem occurred in Ardrossan Harbour, where she's berthing the same side, and whether they can attempt an alteration to the design, which doesn't cost a lot and can be done quickly. It doesn't necessarily need a shipyard, it needs an engineering firm with welding equipment and cutting equipment and some lengths of steel to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
And they can then transfer the fingers, which are the final link, to the other side if need be.
Okay, so anyway, it did fit all right, but like we said, the ramp looked a little bit short, but that could be altered. They can put the ramp on the other side.
Yes.
Which will be what they would have to do.
Yes.
But that's okay because it's interchangeable. We don't know which way the passengers are going to go on, whether it's going to be a gangway or the ramp.
Yes.
And that was it, really, all that was to be said for that, wasn't it, at that point?
Except that the time that she takes to berth seems to be substantially less than the monohull. She seems to come in, if they were faster, onto the berth.
She did come in.
She's lighter, therefore the power can be used to slow her down at the right moment.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more of a detail than reality. Depends on the weather to some extent. Yesterday the weather was too good. We want to see what happens in a bad day with an east wind or a north wind, and we wait then for that, knowing that the windage of a catamaran is less than a monohull.
Yes, it is.
Because of the further deck space which is required by Seamal and Calmac for the crew.
And that's another story there, because as you and I know, there's a whole extra layer, another level basically on the monohulls for that, because the crew stay on the monohulls, whereas with the catamarans they tend to stay on the shore.
Yes.
And the facilities are very limited on the catamarans, therefore for crew.
Yes, that's deliberate in terms of what would be necessary to operate in other ports. It's likely that porter cabins would be situated in the ports that she worked from. That's Brodick and Ardrossan, and that's not necessarily very expensive.
Somebody actually suggested using the old terminal building for that if there was ever needed, but that couldn't possibly happen.
Not anymore, it's not for rent. Yeah.
That's right, it's being used by the chemists, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. They've invested quite a lot of money because they have a 20-year lease now.
Right, so that's that. Mm-hmm. That's that. And I've seen men working on it, so that's right, I've seen them working. Okay, so then the vessel left Brodick, which we saw.
Yes.
And everybody seemed quite happy at that point, and it went to Ardrossan and reversed into the Iris berth.
We assume that she's lying in the Iris berth, according to the information today.
Yes, yeah.
But I think that's perhaps that she's finished her tests and she's now waiting for instructions concerning what's happened in Orkney, whether she's under contract to stay or whether she's allowed to break the contract and return home and commence the service again.
And of course, for anybody who doesn't know, but probably everybody pretty much knows, the reason why there's uncertainty about MV Alfred now is because at the same time as it was carrying out the berthing trials at Brodick and arriving in Brodick, the vessel that replaced it up in Orkney had an engine fire, then took in water and also ran aground, and then the 60 passengers had to be taken off in a lifeboat because of all the problems with the vessel. Nobody was injured, but the vessel is out of action now.
Yes, although it's mobile, we understand from this morning's news that the cars that were on board were able to be driven off rather than drowned in a sinking vessel.
Okay.
So it is the case that the vessel can float, can probably drive on the other engine, and can go under its own steam.
You said that because it's got two engines, hasn't it?
Yes.
The MV Pentalina and is the only other vessel that they have up there, because they only have the Pentalina and the Alfred, don't they?
Correct, on that run, which is the short crossing to Orkney. The other run is longer, and has the Serco vessel, the Hamnavo, which sails to Scrabster and Stromness. And that's 28 miles away from Gills Bay, which is where the Pentalina boat is berthed.
And that was Serco and Northling, wasn't it?
Yes.
And the one we're talking about is Pentland Ferries, who only have 2 vessels.
Yes, this is a privately owned company operated by an ex-salmon fishing family on Orkney, and they are totally independent of any subsidies. They own their own terminals, they own the 2 ships, and they have no connection with the Scottish Government other than to say that they're providing a service which has been successfully used by many of the Orcadians, and apparently now takes much of the freight, particularly Tesco's lorries and the others on the island, and that's been something of a problem. The supermarket,
the freight was taking up too much space, and the other one, was it?
In essence, the family wanted the freight. They didn't necessarily, they weren't so keen necessarily on the passengers, but the freight paid for their ferry, and the freight company and Serco, rather Tesco, and the freight companies seemed to favour the shorter which you would expect, the shorter crossing, since it meant time for men working was more, rather than waiting over this period of 2 hours, 2.5 hours. So in a way, it was a logical step for the shorter sea crossing to take these trucks.
Makes sense. I mean, time and money, because as you know, commercial fares aren't cheap on a ferry. No. So if you can have a shorter crossing, it's going to save a lot of money.
Yes, and you do want to be aware that in Britain the laws concerning driving hours are very strictly controlled with tachographs and tachograph substitutes now. So in terms of time, an hour saved is valuable.
Okay, so coming right up to date, MV Alfred is still at Ardrossan, and we're awaiting to hear what the decision is regarding the Pentalina, because we don't know if the Alfred would have to go back if the Pentalina was out of action long term or not.
Yes, we suspect that if there is some problem which affects Calmac, it could be the case that the Pentland Ferries company is looking to charter a vessel from Europe to fill in that space. It depends very much on the view of the senior management of Calmac as to how they handle this, because they are of course familiar with cancelling services, and it's been a disappointment to Pentland that they've had, really for the first time ever, to cancel services after the Albert went ashore and now the Pentalina.
Yes, that's right, because Albert went grounded before.
Yes, there is a concern in Orkney that something's gone wrong.
There's an investigation underway now.
Yes, and a suspicion that maybe the maintenance of the ships wasn't as good as it should be, but that is a difficult thing to substantiate.
Well, just to read what it says, as the Hebrides News, so an MCA inspector flew to Orkney on Sunday to survey the Pentalina after she was refloated and towed about 100 metres to the pier at St Margaret's Hope. Discovery of a minor ingress of water during an examination of tanks immediately after the incident initially suggests damage has affected a small hull section where the vessel made contact with the shoreline. However, the weight of the ship came to bear more on the ground after the tide ebbed, and a survey needs to ascertain the full extent of the damage. The fault causing the mechanical failure must also be fixed. If dry docking is required for repairs, the Pentalina could be ruled out of action for several days and possibly a week or two depending on yard availability. The managing director, Helen Inkster, said, "The vessel is undergoing a survey from which we will know what, if any, damage has been sustained. Only when we know the extent of the problem can we formulate a plan to resume service." So that's pretty much it. So nobody's made a statement really giving us any indication what the plan is, and they're going to have to find out how long it's out for.
Yes, but in the meantime the services are still available via Scrabster Stromness. The island's not cut off such as we've seen to other islands.
Okay. Is there anything else to say about that then? Is that pretty much where we're up to now, Bob?
Yes, I think so for the time being. It does pose longer term problems. If 9 months is the time that they lose the Albert, will they have some other plan to keep things safer on the Orkney run? And that's what we're waiting for, a longer term decision from them about.
Okay.
They have had, it is worth remembering that the service to Orkney by Pentland Ferries started with 2 ex-Calmac ships. The Iona was one of them and one of the Streakers. So they have had experience of ships that are maybe not too modern, if that's a word to use. It was then their choice to go, after they used these 2 monohulls, to go for catamarans. It was at that point clearly that the company felt that catamarans, A, being cheaper and B, being safer, were better for the Orkney run than any more monohulls. So the current situation is that they do not have the last of the Iona. She was dispatched from Orkney about 6 months ago, and she lay at the spare berth, and then they sold her on to someone else. So there is a situation where if there's going to be a reasonably long-term problem for the Pentalina, they will be running around looking for something to buy or lease to fill in the space.
Okay. Well, we'll just have to keep our ears peeled and our eyes to the ground.
Yes. It's particularly important to Arran that we keep the ferry down here if we can get it, because we do have, first of all, the Calais Isles has still got a mezzanine deck to be repaired, and secondly, the Isle of Arran is very old.
Yep, just about. I think it's just about 40 years from
Yes,
then.
it is.
It was when in 1984.
Yes.
That was the year I came to Arran.
Yeah, that was well, that's another story.
Probably brand new at the time then. It must
Yes,
have been.
she was brand new. She was built for this run. She was built, as I recall it, in Troon, in the Ailsa shipyard. Which
They built her well. They built that.
Wow.
We found that out this spring, didn't we?
works well. Yes, most ships are.
She did well.
You have to remember that in Britain we're very closely controlled by the MCA and its associated safety officers.
Yeah.
We don't get away with anything on ships.
No, there's no jammy dodgers in the shipping world.
No, and
Just
I'll have my hammy dodger.
only in this caravan.
I'll have it now, thank you.
Okay, nice one, Bob. Nice to see you.